The morning sun streamed through the windows of the tiny apartment, casting long rectangles of light across the worn wooden floor. Elias Santos sat at the edge of his bed, tying the frayed laces of his only pair of sneakers. At 12 years old, he was already responsible beyond his years, helping his mother however he could. "Elias, are you ready?" His mother's voice called from the kitchen. "We need to leave in 5 minutes." "Almost ready, Mom," he replied, tucking in his faded blue shirt, the nicest one he owned. Today was different from their usual routine. Normally, Elias would head to school while his mother, Rosa, cleaned homes across the city. But it was Saturday, and his regular babysitter, their elderly neighbor Mrs. Chen, was visiting her daughter. This meant Elias had to accompany his mother to work. "Remember what we talked about," Rosa said as they walked down the street, the summer heat already building despite the early hour. "You must be on your best behavior. The Blackwell house is very fancy with lots of things that can break." Elias nodded seriously. "I'll be careful, Mom. I brought my book and notebook so I can sit quietly and work on my stories." Rosa smiled, reaching down to ruffle his dark hair. Despite their struggles, she was endlessly proud of her son, his kindness, his intelligence, and his creativity. Elias was always writing little stories or drawing pictures that captured the world as he saw it. "Mr. Blackwell is having some kind of business meeting today," she explained. "He said we can use the kitchen entrance and that you can wait in the small sitting room near where I'll be cleaning." The walk to the wealthy part of town took nearly 40 minutes. With each block they passed, the houses grew larger, the lawns wider, and the cars parked in the driveways more expensive. Elias had been to nice neighborhoods before with his mother, but never to this particular street lined with mansions that looked like they belonged in the movies. When they reached the Blackwell estate, Elias couldn't help but stare. The house, if you could even call it that, was enormous, with tall white columns and perfectly trimmed hedges surrounding a circular driveway where a shiny black car was parked. "Wow," he whispered. "Remember, hands to yourself," Rosa said gently but firmly as they approached the service entrance at the side of the house. A stone-faced housekeeper named Mrs. Winters let them in, barely acknowledging Elias's polite good morning. She led them through a maze of hallways, each more impressive than the last, with paintings in gold frames and furniture that looked too perfect to be used by actual humans. "Rosa, you'll start with the dining room and parlor. They need to be spotless for Mr. Blackwell's guests," Mrs. Winters instructed. "The boy can wait in the small sitting room off the kitchen." Elias followed his mother down another hallway until they reached a modest room with a small sofa and a bookshelf. It was clearly meant for staff, not fancy guests, but to Elias, even this room was nicer than their entire apartment. "I'll check on you when I can," Rosa promised, handing him a small paper bag. "Here's your lunch. Please stay in this room unless you need the bathroom, which is just across the hall." Elias nodded, settling onto the sofa with his backpack. "Don't worry, Mom, I'll be fine." For the first hour, Elias read his book, a dog-eared copy of The Secret Garden he'd borrowed from the school library. But soon the sounds of the mansion began to distract him. He could hear distant voices, the occasional clink of glasses, and soft footsteps passing by the door. His curiosity growing, Elias decided to peek out into the hallway. No one was around, and he could hear his mother vacuuming somewhere far off. Surely it wouldn't hurt to look around just a little bit. Stepping quietly into the hall, Elias followed the sound of voices. He told himself he would just take a quick glance at the rest of the house and then return to his room before anyone noticed. The hallway opened into a grand foyer with a ceiling so high it made him dizzy to look up at it. Marble floors gleamed beneath his feet, and a crystal chandelier hung overhead like a frozen waterfall of light. But what truly caught his eye sat in the corner of the room, a magnificent grand piano, its polished black surface reflecting the sunlight from the nearby windows. Elias had never seen such a beautiful instrument up close. At his school, they had an old upright piano with yellow keys and missing ivories. At the community center where he sometimes went after school, there was another worn piano that anyone could play during certain hours. For the past 2 years, Elias had been teaching himself to play whenever he could. An old piano teacher who volunteered at the center had shown him the basics before she moved away, and Elias had checked out library books to learn more. Hours spent practicing while his mother worked late had turned into a private passion, one of the few things that felt entirely his own. Now, As if pulled by an invisible string, Elias found himself moving toward the grand piano. He glanced around nervously, but the foyer was empty. The voices he'd heard earlier now distant. Standing beside the instrument, he marveled at its perfection. Not a scratch or smudge anywhere on its gleaming surface. "Hello?" he whispered to the piano, feeling silly but unable to help himself. His fingers hovered over the keys, not quite touching them. What would they feel like? Would they be heavier than the keys he was used to? Would they sound as magical as he imagined? Just one note, he told himself. Just one quick touch, and then he'd go back to the sitting room. As his fingertip gently pressed down on a middle C, the pure, resonant tone that filled the air was unlike anything he'd ever heard before. It was like comparing a candle to the sun. Both made light, but one with so much more power and clarity. Lost in the moment, Elias pressed another key, then another, forgetting his promise to himself. He wasn't playing a song yet, just feeling the weight of the keys, listening to how clean and perfect each note sounded. "What do you think you're doing?" The sharp voice cut through the room like a knife, and Elias jumped back from the piano as if it had suddenly turned red hot. Standing in the doorway to what appeared to be a dining room was a tall man in an expensive suit. His face wore an expression of surprise and irritation, eyebrows drawn together over cold eyes. I'm sorry," Elias stammered, his heart pounding. "I didn't mean to—" "Richard, what's going on?" a woman's voice called, and soon 3 more adults appeared behind the man. 2 men and a woman, all dressed in business attire that probably cost more than his mother made in a month. "Found this young man helping himself to my Steinway." The man, Mr. Blackwell. Elias said with a note of disbelief in his voice. "Oh my," the woman said, her lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "One of the help's children, I presume?" Elias felt his face grow hot with embarrassment. He should have listened to his mother. Now he might have gotten her in trouble. "I'm very sorry, sir," he managed to say, his voice small but clear. "I was just looking. Your piano is beautiful." Instead of softening the mood, his words seemed to amuse the group. One of the men chuckled. "Well, at least he has good taste, Richard," the man said. "Recognizes quality when he sees it." "My mom is cleaning today," Elias explained, wanting them to understand he wasn't an intruder. "I was supposed to stay in the sitting room." Mr. Blackwell's expression shifted slightly from anger to something more like disdain. "Ah, you must be Rosa's son." "Well, young man, this isn't a museum or a playground. That piano is worth more than most people's homes." The group laughed, and Elias wished the floor would open up and swallow him whole. He took a step back, planning to apologize once more and retreat to the safety of the sitting room. "Tell me," Mr. Blackwell said suddenly, his tone mocking, "do you actually play, or were you just curious about what these keys do?" Before Elias could answer, the door to the kitchen swung open and his mother appeared, her eyes widening in horror when she saw her son standing before her employer and his guests. "Elias," she gasped. "Mr. Blackwell, I am so sorry. He was supposed to stay in the other room." "No harm done, Rosa," Mr. Blackwell replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Your son was just admiring my piano. Apparently he fancies himself a musician." Rosa hurried forward to take Elias by the shoulder. "Please forgive us. It won't happen again." The woman in the group was looking at Elias with an expression of curiosity now. "Do you play, boy?" she asked, her voice softer than the others but still carrying that note of someone who didn't expect much from his answer. Elias looked at his mother, who was silently pleading with him to say nothing that would make this situation worse. But something in him couldn't bear to leave with these people, thinking he was just a foolish child who didn't understand the value of what he touched. "Yes," he said quietly, "I do play." The room fell silent. Mr. Blackwell exchanged glances with his guests, their expressions a mixture of surprise and amusement. Rosa's grip on Elias's shoulder tightened slightly, a silent warning to be careful. "You play, do you?" Mr. Blackwell repeated, raising an eyebrow. He gestured toward the piano with a lazy wave of his hand. "And what exactly do you play?" Mary had a little lamb. "Chopsticks?" One of the men snickered. "Come now, Richard. Don't tease the boy." But there was something in Mr. Blackwell's eyes that told Elias this wasn't just teasing. The man was enjoying this moment of power, this chance to make Elias feel small in this grand house where he clearly didn't belong. "I play." Elias hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. "I play classical music mostly." This time all 4 adults laughed outright. The woman covered her mouth with manicured fingers as if trying to be polite about her disbelief. Classical music. Did you hear that, Richard? The second man said, slapping Mr. Blackwell on the shoulder. The boy plays classical music. Rosa stepped forward, her face flushed with embarrassment, but her eyes flashing with a mother's protective instinct. Mr. Blackwell, please. We should return to our work. Elias didn't mean any harm. Mr. Blackwell held up his hand, silencing her. No, Rosa, this is interesting. He turned to Elias, his smile not reaching his eyes. Classical music, you say? Beethoven? Mozart? Chopin, perhaps? Elias nodded slowly. Yes, sir. I like Chopin a lot. The woman's eyebrows shot up. He even knows Chopin's name. How precocious. Mr. Blackwell crossed his arms, studying Elias with open skepticism. Well then, perhaps you'd like to give us a demonstration, since you've already made yourself comfortable with my piano. Rosa stepped between them. Sir, please. Elias needs to come with me now. I apologize again for the disturbance. Oh, but I insist, Mr. Blackwell said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a friendly invitation but a challenge. After all, if the boy really plays classical music, I'd be doing him a disservice not letting him experience a proper piano. Wouldn't you agree, Judith? The woman, Judith, nodded, her eyes curious now. Absolutely. It's not every day a young musician gets to play on a concert-grade Steinway. Elias felt his heart pounding in his chest. Part of him wanted to run away, to follow his mother back to the safety of the sitting room and forget this ever happened. But another part, the part that spent hours practicing on the out-of-tune piano at the community center, bristled at their dismissive tones and knowing smirks. Elias, his mother whispered, you don't have to do this. But Elias had already made up his mind. He looked directly at Mr. Blackwell. May I play something for you, sir? Mr. Blackwell's expression flickered with surprise at the boy's sudden confidence. He gestured toward the piano bench. By all means, entertain us. As Elias moved toward the piano, he could feel everyone's eyes on him. His worn sneakers barely made a sound on the marble floor. The piano bench was higher than he was used to, but he adjusted it slightly, just as he'd learned to do at the community center. Taking a deep breath, Elias placed his hands on the keys. They felt different, smoother, with just the right amount of resistance. For a moment he closed his eyes, trying to center himself the way his old teacher had taught him. Well, Mr. Blackwell prompted impatiently. We're waiting. One of the men chuckled. Perhaps he's forgotten his pieces. Elias opened his eyes, positioned his fingers, and began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Fantaisie Impromptu filled the room. Hesitant at first, then growing in confidence with each measure, the familiar music flowed from his fingers, muscle memory taking over despite the unfamiliar instrument. The rich resonant tones of the Steinway made the piece sound fuller, more alive than it ever had on the old pianos he was used to. Behind him he heard a soft gasp, his mother most likely. But Elias didn't turn around. He was lost in the music now, his small body swaying slightly as his hands moved across the keys, tackling the difficult runs and arpeggios with surprising dexterity. The piece was challenging, one he'd been working on for months, picking it apart measure by measure, practicing the trickiest sections over and over until his fingers knew the way. On the community center's piano, some notes would stick or sound tinny, forcing him to adjust. But here, on this magnificent instrument, every note rang true, allowing him to play the way he'd always heard the music in his head. As Elias reached the middle section, the lyrical gentle melody that contrasted with the whirlwind opening, he dared to glance up. Mr. Blackwell stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, the mocking smile completely gone from his face. Beside him, Judith had her hand pressed to her chest, her eyes wide with astonishment. The two men were equally stunned, one gripping the back of a chair, the other standing completely still, as if afraid any movement might break the spell of the music. And there was his mother, Rosa, tears streaming down her face, her hands clasped tightly together. Elias had never played for her like this before. At home, without a piano, she'd only heard him practicing simple tunes on a small keyboard a neighbor had given them when they moved out. She had no idea what her son could really do. Drawing strength from her proud gaze, Elias turned his attention back to the piano, diving into the final section of the piece. His small hand stretched to reach the chords, his fingers flying through the faster passages with precision that belied his age and limited training. When the final notes faded into silence, no one moved. No one spoke. Elias sat still at the piano, suddenly aware of how loud his heart was beating in his ears. Had he made a mistake? Played too poorly? The silence stretched on, and he slowly turned on the bench to face the room. What he saw made his breath catch. All 5 adults were staring at him with expressions ranging from shock to awe. Mr. Blackwell's face had lost all traces of its earlier condescension, replaced by something that looked almost like respect. It was Judith who broke the silence, stepping forward with an astonished laugh. "My God, Richard, the boy's a prodigy." One of the men shook his head in disbelief. "Where on earth did you learn to play like that, son?" Before Elias could answer, his mother moved to his side, placing a protective hand on his shoulder. Her voice was thick with emotion but steady. "My son has been teaching himself. He practices at the community center whenever he can." "Teaching himself?" Mr. Blackwell repeated, his voice hushed. He approached the piano slowly, as if seeing both it and Elias for the first time. "That's not possible. That piece, it's extraordinarily difficult. Conservatory students struggle with it." Elias looked down at his hands, suddenly self-conscious. "I made some mistakes in the middle part. The fast sections are hard to get right." Mr. Blackwell let out a surprised laugh. "Mistakes? Young man, professional pianist would be proud of that performance." He turned to Rosa, his demeanor completely transformed. "How long has he been playing?" Rosa shook her head, still looking stunned herself. 2 years, maybe? There was a teacher at the community center who showed him the basics before she moved away. After that, she looked at her son with newfound wonder. "After that, I thought he was just playing around on the piano when I was working late. I had no idea." The second man stepped forward, extending his hand to Elias. "I'm David Chen. I sit on the board of the City Symphony." His handshake was firm, his eyes intent on Elias's face. "Young man, talent like yours comes along once in a generation. Tell me, what else can you play?" Elias blinked, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in atmosphere. Just minutes ago, these people had been laughing at him. Now they were gathering around the piano, their faces eager and curious. "I know some Bach," he said hesitantly, "and I've been working on a Mozart sonata, but it's not very good yet." "Play something else," Mr. Blackwell urged, all traces of his earlier disdain gone. "Please." Elias looked to his mother for guidance. Rosa's eyes were still shining with tears, but she nodded encouragingly. "It's okay, Elias," she said softly. "Show them what you can do." Elias turned back to the piano, his fingers hovering over the keys for a moment as he decided what to play next. The room was silent except for the soft ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. He chose Bach's Prelude in C major, the first classical piece he had ever learned completely. As the gentle, flowing arpeggios filled the room, Mr. Chen moved closer to Mr. Blackwell, speaking in a hushed tone that Elias could still hear as he played. "Richard, do you realize what we've stumbled upon here? This boy has extraordinary talent. Raw, untrained, but extraordinary nonetheless." Mr. Blackwell nodded, his eyes never leaving Elias's small hands as they moved confidently across the keyboard. "I've never seen anything like it. Especially considering the circumstances." Elias tried not to let their words distract him as he continued playing. The Bach piece was simpler than the Chopin, but he put his heart into it, trying to bring out the beauty in the seemingly straightforward progression of notes. When he finished, he didn't wait for prompting, but moved directly into the Mozart sonata he had mentioned, the first movement of Sonata No. 16 in C major, which he was still learning. He played through it more carefully, stumbling slightly on a few passages but recovering quickly. He could feel his confidence growing with each minute spent at this magnificent piano. It responded to his touch in ways the old, worn instruments he usually played never could, allowing him to create dynamics and tones he'd only imagined before. When he finally stopped and turned around again, the atmosphere in the room had completely transformed. What had begun as mockery had turned to respect, even admiration. Judith had taken a seat on a nearby chair, watching him with thoughtful eyes. The two men stood with their arms crossed, occasionally exchanging glances of disbelief. Mr. Blackwell cleared his throat. "Young man, Elias, is it? How old are you?" 12, sir," Elias replied. 12, Mr. Blackwell repeated, shaking his head in wonder. "And you've never had formal training? Just that brief time with a teacher at the community center?" Elias nodded. She showed me how to read music and some basic techniques. She gave me books to study before she left. After that, I just practiced whenever I could. And where exactly do you practice? Mr. Chen asked. Rosa answered for him. There's a community center near our apartment. They have an old piano that anyone can use during certain hours. Elias goes there after school when I'm still working. And at home? Judith inquired gently. Elias looked down at his hands. We don't have a piano at home. A neighbor gave us a small keyboard when they moved away, but it's only 4 octaves and some of the keys don't work anymore. The adults exchanged glances that Elias couldn't quite interpret. Pity? Surprise? He wasn't sure, but he didn't like feeling like a curiosity on display. Mr. Blackwell suddenly clapped his hands together. Well, this calls for a celebration. Rosa, would you mind bringing us some refreshments? Perhaps some of that excellent lemonade Mrs. Winters made this morning. And please join us. Your son has given us quite the performance. Rosa hesitated, clearly unused to being invited to sit with her employers. Sir, I still have the upstairs rooms to clean. Nonsense. That can wait. This is far more important. Mr. Blackwell's tone was friendly but left no room for argument. As Rosa disappeared toward the kitchen, Mr. Chen pulled his phone from his pocket. I hope you don't mind, Richard, but I'd like to make a call. There's someone who should hear about this boy. Mr. Blackwell nodded, then turned back to Elias, who was still sitting at the piano bench feeling increasingly uncomfortable under the scrutiny of these wealthy strangers. Elias, Mr. Blackwell said, his voice softer now, almost kind. What you can do, it's very special. Do you understand that? Elias shrugged slightly. I just like playing. It makes me feel. He struggled to find the right words. It makes me feel like I'm somewhere else. Somewhere better. Judith's expression softened. Music is an escape for many of us, dear, but what you have is more than just an appreciation for music. It's a gift. The other man, who had been quiet until now, stepped forward. Richard, we should contact Anthony at the conservatory. This boy needs proper training, proper mentorship. Mr. Blackwell nodded thoughtfully. I was thinking the same thing, Peter. Elias felt a flutter of anxiety in his chest. They were talking about him as if he weren't there, making plans he didn't understand. He looked toward the door, wishing his mother would return. As if sensing his discomfort, Judith moved to sit beside him on the piano bench, careful to keep a respectful distance. Do you enjoy school, Elias? Grateful for the normal question, Elias nodded. Yes, ma'am. I like reading and science the most. And music class, even though we don't do much piano there. And what do you want to be when you grow up? She asked with a gentle smile. Elias had been asked this question many times by teachers and other adults, but he'd never had a clear answer. He knew what was realistic and what wasn't for someone from his neighborhood, but sitting here at this beautiful piano, after playing his heart out, he suddenly found the courage to voice the dream he'd kept hidden. A pianist, he said quietly. I want to play piano for people all over the world. Mr. Blackwell, who had been listening to their conversation, nodded approvingly. With talent like yours, that's not just a dream, young man, it's a real possibility. Rosa returned with a tray of lemonade, looking slightly flustered at being asked to serve and join the gathering at the same time. She set the tray down on a side table and quickly moved to stand near Elias as if she could sense his unease. Mr. Chen returned from making his phone call, his face animated with excitement. Good news. Dr. Harriet Lynn from the City Conservatory happens to be in town this weekend. She's agreed to come by this afternoon to meet Elias. Rosa's eyes widened. The City Conservatory? But that's one of the most prestigious music schools in the country. Mr. Chen finished for her. Yes, indeed. Dr. Lin is the head of the piano department and a former concert pianist herself. She's very interested in meeting your son. Elias felt a mix of excitement and terror at the prospect. The City Conservatory was a name he'd seen in newspaper articles about young musicians, a place for gifted students from wealthy families, not for kids like him from the east side of town. I don't understand, Rosa said, her voice cautious. Why would she want to meet Elias? Mr. Blackwell exchanged glances with his guests before answering. Mrs. Santos, your son has extraordinary talent, the kind of talent that deserves nurturing, proper training, proper opportunities. But we can't afford, Rosa began. There are scholarships, Judith interjected gently. Sponsorships, ways to make it work. Mr. Chen nodded enthusiastically. Dr. Lin oversees the conservatory's Young Artists program. They provide full scholarships to exceptionally talented students regardless of financial background. Elias looked up at his mother, hardly daring to hope. The idea that he might have access to real training, to regular practice on a proper piano, it seemed too good to be true. Rosa placed her hand on Elias's shoulder, her expression a mixture of pride and concern. This is all happening very fast. An hour ago we were just here so I could clean, and now your son has opened a door that could change both your lives, Mr. Blackwell said. I understand your caution, Mrs. Santos, but please at least meet with Dr. Lin. Let her assess Elias's abilities professionally. Rosa took a deep breath, looking down at her son. What do you think, Elias? Would you like to play for this doctor from the conservatory? Elias thought about the community center piano with its sticky keys and missing ivories. He thought about the hours he spent there, playing the same pieces over and over, trying to make them sound like the recordings he found online. He thought about how it felt to play on this magnificent Steinway, how the music had flowed from his fingers in a way it never had before. Yes, he said, his voice stronger now. I want to play for her. The next few hours passed in a blur for Elias. After agreeing to meet Dr. Lin, he had been given permission to stay at the piano, practicing while they waited for her arrival. Mr. Blackwell had shown him to the music room, a smaller space off the main foyer with bookshelves full of sheet music collected over decades. Feel free to use anything here, Mr. Blackwell had said, gesturing to the shelves. My late wife was quite the pianist herself. She would have been delighted to see her music being put to good use. Now surrounded by more sheet music than he had ever seen in one place, Elias felt like he had discovered a hidden treasure. He carefully flipped through collections of Bach, Beethoven, and Chopin, recognizing pieces he had only heard online but never had the music for. His mother had gone back to work after much insistence from her part, though Mr. Blackwell had assured her it wasn't necessary. Consider it a day off with pay, he had said, but Rosa had firmly shaken her head. I appreciate that, sir, but I have a job to do, she had replied with quiet dignity. I'll finish my work while Elias practices. Elias understood his mother's pride. She had never accepted charity, always insisting on earning her way. But he could also see the worry in her eyes, worry about what all this sudden attention might mean for their simple, structured lives. Lost in his thoughts, Elias didn't notice when the doorbell rang. He was absorbed in a piece of music he had just discovered, Debussy's Clair de Lune, trying to work out the fingering for a particularly challenging passage. Elias. He looked up to see his mother standing in the doorway, her expression a mixture of nervousness and pride. Behind her stood a small woman with silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore simple but elegant clothes, and carried herself with a quiet authority that immediately commanded Elias's attention. Dr. Lin is here to meet you, Rosa said softly. The woman stepped forward, offering Elias a warm smile. Hello, Elias. I'm Dr. Harriet Lin from the City Conservatory. Mr. Chen tells me you're quite the pianist. Elias stood up quickly, nearly knocking over the piano bench in his haste. Hello, ma'am. It's nice to meet you. Dr. Lin approached the piano, glancing at the music he had been working on. Debussy? An ambitious choice. There was no mockery in her voice, only genuine interest. I just found it, Elias admitted. I've heard it before, but I've never had the music to learn it properly. Dr. Lin nodded, studying him with keen eyes. Mr. Chen was quite enthusiastic on the phone. He said you've had almost no formal training? Elias nodded, suddenly feeling self-conscious under her professional gaze. What if Mr. Chen and the others had exaggerated his abilities? What if Dr. Lin found him lacking? As if sensing his anxiety, Dr. Lin's expression softened. There's no need to be nervous, Elias. I'm simply here to listen and to help if I can. She gestured to the piano. Would you play something for me? Whatever you feel most comfortable with. Elias glanced at his mother, who gave him an encouraging nod. He sat back down at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play the Chopin piece again, the one that had so surprised Mr. Blackwell and his guests earlier. This time, he was more nervous, knowing that Dr. Lin would be listening with a professional's ear, noticing every mistake, every technical flaw. But as he played, he gradually lost himself in the music, forgetting about the audience and focusing only on the sounds he was creating. When he finished, he looked up to find Dr. Lin watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. She was silent for a long moment, then asked, "May I sit with you?" Elias nodded, moving over on the bench to make room. Dr. Lin sat beside him, her hands hovering over the keys. "Do you mind if I show you something?" she asked. "Of course not," Elias replied eagerly. Dr. Lin positioned her hands and played a short section of the piece he had just completed, the part where he had stumbled slightly. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, bringing out nuances in the music that Elias had tried to achieve but couldn't quite manage. "Do you see what I'm doing with my wrist here?" she asked, demonstrating again, more slowly this time. "It helps with the transitions between these chords." Elias watched intently, then tried to copy her movement. It felt awkward at first, but when he played the passage again, it flowed more smoothly. "Yes, exactly like that," Dr. Lin said, smiling. "You have very good instincts, Elias. You've figured out a great deal on your own." She spent the next 20 minutes working with him, offering small suggestions, demonstrating techniques, asking him to play different sections in different ways. It wasn't a formal lesson, more like a conversation through music. Elias soaked up every word, every demonstration, trying each suggestion eagerly. From the doorway, Rosa watched in silence, joined by Mr. Blackwell and Mr. Chen, who had returned to hear Dr. Lin's assessment. Finally, Dr. Lin stood up from the bench. "Thank you, Elias, that was lovely." She turned to the adults in the doorway. "Mr. Chen, might I have a word with you and Mr. Blackwell? And Mrs. Santos, please join us." Elias remained at the piano as the adults stepped into the hallway. He could hear their murmured voices but couldn't make out what they were saying. He ran his fingers lightly over the keys, not pressing hard enough to make a sound, just feeling their smooth surface beneath his fingertips. Whatever happened next, he would never forget today. The day he got to play on a real concert piano, the day a real piano teacher showed him how to play better. Even if nothing else came of it, he would carry this memory with him. A few minutes later, they all returned. Dr. Lin came directly to him, sitting down in a chair across from the piano bench. "Elias," she began, her voice gentle but serious, "I've been teaching piano for over 30 years, and I've worked with hundreds of young musicians. What you have, your talent, your musicality, your natural instinct for the instrument, it's very rare, especially considering your limited access to proper instruction and practice facilities." Elias felt his heart beating faster. "Thank you, ma'am." "The City Conservatory has a young artists program for exceptionally talented students," she continued. "It provides comprehensive musical education, regular access to practice facilities, and performance opportunities. Based on what I've heard today, I would like to offer you a full scholarship to this program." Elias stared at her, unable to believe what he was hearing. "A scholarship? For me?" Dr. Lin nodded. "A full scholarship, which would cover all your lessons, materials, and access to practice rooms. You would attend regular classes after school and on weekends." Elias looked at his mother, who was standing very still, her expression unreadable. "Mom?" Rosa stepped forward. "It's a very generous offer, Dr. Lin, but I'm afraid there are practical considerations. Transportation, scheduling with my work hours. We've discussed some possible solutions," Mr. Blackwell interjected. "The conservatory is quite far from your neighborhood, but there's a bus that runs directly there from the community center near your home. As for scheduling, the Young Artists program offers some flexibility to accommodate different family situations." Mr. Chen added, "There's also a mentor program where older students help younger ones with transportation and additional practice sessions." Rosa still looked uncertain. "It's not that I don't appreciate the opportunity. I do, more than I can say. But I don't want Elias to get his hopes up if this isn't practical for our situation." Dr. Lin nodded understandingly. Mrs. Santos, your concerns are completely valid. The path of a young musician isn't an easy one, especially when there are financial and logistical challenges. But if Elias is willing to put in the work, and if we can find solutions to these practical issues, I believe he has the potential to go very far. She turned back to Elias. The most important question is this something you want, Elias? It would mean a lot of hard work, a lot of practice, and balancing your regular schoolwork with music studies. Elias thought about the hours he already spent at the community center piano, the way he rushed through his homework so he could have more time to practice, the way music filled his thoughts even when he wasn't playing. Then he thought about having real lessons, proper books, access to a good piano every day. Yes, he said firmly, it's what I want more than anything. 5 years later, Elias stood backstage at the city concert hall, his heart pounding in his chest. Through a small gap in the curtains, he could see the grand piano waiting for him on the stage, gleaming under the spotlights. The concert hall was filling up with people, important people, music critics, potential sponsors, and proud teachers. Nervous? A gentle voice asked from behind him. Elias turned to see Dr. Lin, her hair now completely silver but her eyes as sharp and kind as ever. Over the past 5 years, she had become much more than just his teacher. She was his mentor, his guide through the complex world of classical music, and sometimes when things got especially tough, almost a second mother. A little, he admitted, smoothing down the front of his new suit, a gift from Mr. Blackwell for this special occasion. It's a bigger audience than I'm used to. Dr. Lin smiled, but not a bigger stage. You've been preparing for this moment since the day I met you. Elias nodded, thinking back to that life-changing afternoon 5 years ago when he had first touched Mr. Blackwell's piano. So much had happened since then. The first year in the Young Artists program had been challenging. The long bus rides to and from the conservatory, the struggle to balance regular schoolwork with his music studies, the moments of doubt when a piece seemed too difficult or a technique too complex to master. There had been times when he wondered if he had taken on too much. But there had also been moments of pure joy, the first time he mastered a piece that had once seemed impossible. The thrill of performing in his first student recital, the growing confidence that came with each new skill he acquired. And through it all, his mother had been his biggest supporter. Rosa had rearranged her cleaning schedule to be available for his important performances. She had taken on extra jobs to help with the additional expenses that came with Elias's new path, proper clothes for recitals, sheet music beyond what the scholarship covered, a better keyboard for home practice. Mr. Blackwell had helped too, in ways that went beyond financial support. He had opened his home to Elias, allowing him to practice on the Steinway whenever he needed a proper piano. He had attended every major performance, sitting proudly in the audience alongside Rosa. 5 minutes, Elias, the stage manager called out, interrupting his thoughts. Dr. Lin squeezed his shoulder. Your mother is in the front row, right where you asked for her to be seated. Mr. Blackwell is beside her. And Mr. Chen brought the entire board of the symphony. Elias took a deep breath. I wish Dad could have been here. It was something he rarely spoke about. The father who had left when Elias was just 4 years old, long before anyone knew about his musical gift. Over the years, Elias had sometimes wondered if his father would have stayed if he had known what his son would become. Dr. Lin's expression softened. He's missing something extraordinary, Elias. But remember, talent like yours doesn't come from nowhere. Your mother's determination, her work ethic, her courage, those qualities are in you too. They're as much a part of your music as your technical skills. Elias nodded, blinking back unexpected tears. I know. Now, Dr. Lin said, her tone becoming brisk again. Run through your program for me one more time. Elias straightened his shoulders. Bach's Prelude and Fugue in C minor, Beethoven's Sonata No. 8 Intermission, then Chopin's Ballade No. 1, and finally Debussy's Clair de Lune. Perfect, Dr. Lin approved. The journey of your musical life so far from where you began to where you are now. And remember what we discussed about the Chopin. Take my time with the quiet passages, don't rush the build, Elias recited. It was advice she had given him countless times during their lessons. Exactly. Trust yourself, trust the music, and trust your preparation. Dr. Lin glanced at her watch. It's time. The stage manager appeared again, gesturing for Elias to take his position. With one last deep breath, Elias stepped toward the wings. Elias, Dr. Lin called softly. When he turned, she was smiling. You've already succeeded. Everything that happens from this point forward is just a bonus. As he walked onto the stage, the applause washed over him like a wave. The lights were bright, making it difficult to see individual faces in the audience, but he could just make out his mother in the front row, sitting straighter than he had ever seen her sit before. Beside her was Mr. Blackwell, looking pleased and proud. Elias bowed, then settled himself at the piano bench, adjusting it slightly the way he had been taught. He positioned his hands above the keys, took one more deep breath, and began to play. The Bach flowed from his fingers with a confidence that would have amazed his 12-year-old self. 5 years of proper training, thousands of hours of practice, countless lessons and master classes had transformed his raw talent into disciplined artistry, but underneath the technical precision was the same pure love of music that had first drawn him to the community center piano all those years ago. As he moved through his program, Elias felt the audience responding to his playing. The Beethoven brought a hushed intensity to the hall, while the Chopin, after the intermission, drew them into its emotional journey, from serene beauty to dramatic passion. By the time he reached the Debussy, the piece he had discovered in Mr. Blackwell's music room on that first day, Elias was no longer thinking about technique, or the audience, or even his next notes. He was simply feeling the music, letting it flow through him and out into the concert hall. As the final gentle notes of Clair de Lune faded into silence, there was a moment of complete stillness. Then the applause began, hesitant at first, then building into thunderous approval. Elias stood and bowed, his eyes seeking out his mother in the front row. Rosa was on her feet, tears streaming down her face, clapping harder than anyone else in the hall. Next to her, Mr. Blackwell was also standing, his usual reserved expression replaced by genuine emotion. As Elias took his second bow, he saw Dr. Lin standing in the wings, her hands pressed together in front of her heart, her expression one of pure pride. She had believed in him from the beginning, had fought for his scholarship to be extended when the initial program ended, had pushed him to apply for this evening's showcase of young talent. The applause continued, and Elias was gestured to take another bow. As he straightened up this time, he saw something unexpected. Audience members were rising to their feet, first just a few, then more, until the entire concert hall was giving him a standing ovation. A standing ovation for the son of a cleaning lady. A standing ovation for a boy who had taught himself to play on an old community center piano. A standing ovation for the child who had been mocked for daring to touch a rich man's Steinway. As he took his final bow and walked off stage, Elias felt a sense of completion. Not an ending. He knew this was just the beginning of his journey, but the closing of an important chapter. Backstage, his mother was waiting for him, her arms open wide. Elias stepped into her embrace, feeling her tears dampening his shoulder. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. So proud." Over her shoulder, Elias could see Mr. Blackwell and Dr. Lin deep in conversation with a distinguished-looking man he didn't recognize. They kept glancing his way, and when they saw him looking, they smiled and beckoned him over. "Elias," Mr. Blackwell said as he approached, his mother at his side. "This is Professor Thomas Wilson from the National Academy of Music. He'd like to speak with you about your future." The man extended his hand. "That was an exceptional performance, young man."
Exceptional in every way.
"We have a special program for gifted pianists like yourself. Full scholarship, of course, with opportunities to perform internationally." Elias shook the man's hand, almost unable to process what he was hearing. The National Academy was the most prestigious music school in the country. "Thank you, sir," he managed to say. "I'm honored you enjoyed my playing." "Enjoyed it? My boy, performances like that are why I do what I do." Professor Wilson turned to Rosa. "Mrs. Santos, you must be incredibly proud of your son." Rosa nodded, her eyes still shining with tears. "I am, but I'm not surprised. Even when he was small, before we knew about his gift for music, Elias always put his whole heart into everything he did." As the adults continued talking about scholarships and programs and opportunities, Elias found himself thinking about that fateful day 5 years ago. He remembered the shame he had felt when Mr. Blackwell and his friends had laughed at the idea of him playing the piano. He remembered the courage it had taken to sit down on that bench despite their mockery. One moment of courage had changed everything. One decision to show what he could do instead of retreating in embarrassment had opened doors he never knew existed. As he stood there in his concert suit, surrounded by people who believed in his talent and his future, Elias made a silent promise to himself. No matter where his music took him, no matter what stages he played on or what acclaim he received, he would never forget where he came from, and he would never, ever stop playing from his heart.